barbecue sauce. I actually have a personal friend in the SCA who, anytime we go and there's a potluck or an inn and they have barbecued pork sandwiches, she usually has to ask to see the barbecue sauce label because she is allergic to pineapple, and pineapple is in a lot of barbecue sauce. Then speaking for my husband, one of the big things we have to look for, the mysterious maltodextrin is one of our most annoying ingredients, because there's probably a, it's almost 90% likely that it will actually be fine, but there's also the chance that it was made with wheat and it could cause him problems as a celiac. So unless it tells us explicitly that it is not made from wheat, we usually just choose to avoid it. So there's a variety of different reasons that people have a special diet that they need to follow. And we're going to talk, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is probably going to focus on people with celiac disease. In general, if you don't know the person well, it's best to treat celiac disease like a wheat allergy. And so basically that's the first thing we're going to touch on, is people who have, severe health reasons, such as allergies or celiac disease. The thing about celiac disease is there's a broad range of sensitivities and results. So unless you know the person, treat it like an allergy. And generally when you're talking about people with a severe food allergy that could end up with them in the hospital, just as a generic, you're in charge of an inn or a feast, unless somebody specifically talks to you, don't worry about trying to accommodate these people, because most of them are not going to trust you not to accidentally cross-contaminate you, no matter how hard you try. My husband is lucky. He is incredibly sensitive, so even one little grain of flour gets into whatever he is eating, and he will have a reaction. We're fortunate that his reactions are on the mild spectrum. There are people with celiac disease who they are as sensitive as my husband and could end up in the hospital because their reactions are that bad. So that's why I say generally treat celiac disease as a wheat allergy, even though it isn't technically the same thing unless you actually know the person. A number of allergies that I've seen in the SCA, and this is important because I think sometimes we forget about the broad number of food allergies that can affect people coming to eat at our feasts and our inns, or even just when we have food out to offer. And these are just allergies on scadians that I've known. I've had people who are allergic to vinegar. I've had people who are allergic to tannins, so that pretty much takes out most wines. Cherries, I have a friend who's allergic to pineapple. Again, that doesn't affect most period cooking, but again, modern cooking. I have a friend who's allergic to stevia, which also a modern cooking thing, but that tends to be the new go-to, oh, there's no calories sweetener. And so she's having a lot of problems like that. So, and then when it comes to food allergens, one of the things that I have been using lately, over in the European Union, they seem to kind of have a slightly better appreciation of food allergens and sensitivities than we do. We went to Scotland last spring while they were still part of the European Union. And I learned a great deal about, well, not a great deal, but enough to appreciate their laws on identifying major known food allergens. their list, there are 14 things, which goes well beyond what most of us here in the United States are familiar with. In fact, one of these things, I still don't completely get what it is, so I think it's something we just don't see over here. So their food allergen list is gluten, crustaceans, eggs, fish, peanuts, soy, milk, tree nuts, celery, mustard, sesame, sulfites, mollusks, and lupin, which lupin is a new one to me, but apparently it is a grain, and apparently it is one of the more common food allergens. So when I was trying to put this class together and I wanted to make sure we kind of touched on the common things, I went with them because they have the most extensive list of rules regarding special allergens. So
lupins are a bean, a pulp.
Okay. It said that it was often in flour or something like that. That one was a new one to me, but thank you. That one was one, when I went to go to the list again, I was like, wait, I don't remember seeing that one, and had to do a quick scan of their list. So it's really interesting, especially when we're talking about gluten-free eating here in the US. It tends to be treated like a fad diet by most people, whereas when we were over in Scotland, it was treated as a legitimate health issue, just the same as somebody who's allergic to tree nuts or eggs or, you know, any of those things. So it was actually really nice when we went over there. It was a lot easier for him to, we right up knew if he could eat or not, because they just took it so much more seriously. So yeah, unless you know the person or they've specifically spoken to you, people who fall into this category of these severe health risks, don't waste your brain space on it. My husband, even if I were cooking a feast and didn't cook anything gluten-free, he would not eat it if I was making it in a place that we had rented, because it is so hard to clean up and thoroughly make sure there's not a single crumb or something somewhere. You know, you want to think you're that good, but it's really hard, and it's really easy to just get a little bit. So we wouldn't we never plan on him eating feast anymore, which is kind of sad, because definitely I enjoy a good SCA feast. And I always have to plan food for him. Now, not everybody is as sensitive as my husband. There are some people who are celiac who can get away with getting a little bit of cross-contamination. There are also a lot of people who they're just sensitive to gluten. It's not celiac disease. Celiac disease, for the record, is actually an autoimmune disease. And when you get the wheat gluten in your stomach and your intestines, your body actually attacks itself. So there are a lot of people who are still incredibly sensitive to gluten who are not celiac. And often those people and some of the people with less severe reactions who are celiac can handle a little bit of cross-contamination. My husband, we will take risks when we're at home because his reactions are so mild, but when we're at an SCA event or when we're traveling, we just don't want to deal with it because it's just an added stressor. So we just leave him be. But there are people who are comfortable with the moderate risk of eating things that might have accidentally come into contact with gluten. And so when you're talking about these people, this is where you do want to start thinking about, okay, what can I do to accommodate these people who are sensitive? And so I need to make sure I have something that they can eat, or I want to have something they can eat that is safe for them. And sorry, that sentence wandered off. I'm trying to keep track of my notes here too. When you're talking food sensitivities, it's not just the things that people are allergic to. There are the easy ones, dairy and, gluten and eggs. Those are some of the easy ones to think about. Other common food sensitivities that you may not necessarily think about. Most of the things that people are allergic to can also be in the sensitivity range. Corn, nightshade vegetables, citrus. I've known some people who, depending on if it was pure cane sugar or not, could have a problem. Another common one that people might want to avoid is onions, because that can lead to some, tummy problems. So those are some of the people that you want to start thinking about. Okay, maybe we want to try to make sure there are things they can eat in this situation. The people you really want to spend most of your brain planning, when you're trying to think, okay, who am I going to accommodate and who am I not going to accommodate, are people who are eating something for a diet or health reasons, not necessarily that they are sensitive or anything. A lot of these people, you start to run into things like gluten and things like that, not because they specifically want it gluten-free, but a lot of the diets, stress, not quite so many carbs. So you might want to think about offering, egg pie, but not having a crust or something like that. That's people who have chosen, a diet like keto or like the Sonoma diet or the Atkins diet, or even who are just eating gluten-free because, well, even though they don't have anything specific, they just feel better. I've known people like that. So definitely those are kind of some of the people that you want to think about as you are preparing your foods. And then the last one, and I feel like this one is the one that I usually kind of missed out the most when I was originally SCA cooking. I wouldn't always take this into account the way that I should have. And this would be people who, for religious or cultural or moral reasons, choose to eat certain diets. So some of the easy ones, are people who eat kosher or halal, or, your vegetarians and your vegans. And then one I didn't think about much, and as I was trying to put together my list last night, I realized even Lent, there are a lot of people who participate in Lent and who you might want to think about these people. I'm not saying that you have to, but it's a good idea when you are planning a feast or an inn. If you are in an area where there are, might be a lot of people following these conventions, that maybe you want to make sure that they will have food available. And there are a lot of cultures and religions that have vegetarian or close to vegetarian food restrictions. So especially trying to think about the vegetarians, which can be hard, depending on the particular feast that you're trying to put together, or inns I think are easier because they're not as expected to be themed. Usually when we're talking about feasts, and we're usually talking about, oh, this is a 14th century French feast. When I made a 14th century French feast, it was really hard to make sure that the vegetarians had sufficient food. I made sure that they had food in every course that was provided, but that was about the best I could do just because of the nature of 14th century French feasting. And I felt a little bit bad about it, and probably if I had spent a little bit more time researching, I might have been able to do better. But, you know, it is what it is. So that's kind of my outline of, okay, these are the people you should be thinking about and who you shouldn't be. The rest of this is going to be more talking about, you know, what are things that we can do, and this I definitely welcome, you know, conversation between all of us as to what, you know, what we think are some great ideas. Again, this, I didn't get this class outlined quite as well as I would have liked, so I don't have as many, I don't have a handout and I don't have as many links to things as I probably would have preferred.
So Agnes,
yes.
Uchachim, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, had some interesting stuff that she put into the chat. I don't know if everyone's seen it, but she was talking about.
I saw it. I didn't have a chance to read it yet.
Yeah, so I'll just read it real quick since you're like at a change of topics point.
Yeah. Just
to get that out there. So she was talking about lupin, also spelled lupine, is a legume belonging to the same plant family as peanuts. Lupin beans are traditional food in Mediterranean cuisine. Lupin beans are eaten whole and also used to make ingredients such as lupine flour and lupin protein. Lupin can be found in a wide range of products, including baked goods such as bread, pastries, and pies, pasta or noodles, sauces, beverages, meat-based products, such as burgers and sausages. Foods free of gluten, soy, or genetically modified ingredients may contain lupin. Lupin flour is sometimes used in gluten-free prepared ingredients. So, you know, you could have told me earlier today that lupin was made from werewolves, and I probably would have believed you, but I just wanted to read that.
That one was a quick, as I was making sure I had actual notes last night, which I'm glad I at least got that far in my planning for this class. That one, I didn't have a lot of time to throw into researching it. So I was like, okay, that's a new one for me. And that is actually, that brings up a good point of often when you're trying to accommodate one specific type of food issue, you often will actually invite other issues. So like actually one of the biggest challenges I have when it comes to our extended family at the holidays is trying to feed my husband and my nephews, both of whom are allergic to tree nuts and peanuts. And a lot of when I'm taking just gluten-free like cookie mixes off the shelf or the gluten-free pasta noodles, I have to actually check extra to make sure that they will be okay in addition to him. So that's a good thing to think about, is when you do start trying to accommodate one food issue, it isn't unusual to find yourself having to end up, you know, potentially impacting other people. You know, again, if I were going to an inn or something like that, I think that there's a lot less concern there, because most people who have food issues kind of just, you know, steer clear, because in a lot of those situations, it's just too hard for a single person to really truly make sure that your food is safe. And it's not necessarily even a thought on that you particularly are bad. It's just, you know, you make one little slip up and they could end up completely miserable.
So Sabina has a question. She asks, at what point do you say, okay, I can't accommodate all. This is my stopping point?
I think that is a little bit of a personal thing, and it depends on what you're talking about. On a feast, I think that you can, you don't have to go as far as I would for an inn. And at an inn, I would probably try to make a lot more accommodations of making sure I had stuff, you know, like if I were serving an inn, I would make sure I had a protein for my vegetarian friends and a meat protein. And I would probably even go so far as to, if it's me, I almost certainly will be providing gluten-free food, because my kitchen has to be gluten-free here at home. So anything that I'm bringing in will indeed be gluten-free. So I will usually when I handled the inn for Known World Heralds and Scribes last year, we had 2 separate tables. I still had to monitor the gluten-free table like a hawk, because people would accidentally start to almost cross-contaminate it. And there were several times I actually had to pull certain dishes off the gluten-free table because somebody snuck in and accidentally cross-contaminated on me, and I still wanted my husband to be able to eat. So I think that you do go a lot further when you're talking about an inn, but when you're talking about a feast, part of it is trying to think about who you know will be there. You know, if you know, for example, that one of the royals is, you know, needs gluten-free food, then of course you're going to want to try to accommodate that more than you would in other situations. So it is, unfortunately, it's going to be on a case-by-case thing, but also think about it as, if you have to make a separate dish for each individual food issue, so you're going to make your main dish that's going to be served to everybody, and so if you have something that you have to make a separate thing on every single course, that's too much. Now, if you can try to plan your feast in a way that, okay, I have, at least in every course that we're going to have, we have something that people who have issues with dairy can eat. We have something that vegetarians can eat. We have something that people who are allergic to eggs can eat. As long as they have something, I think you've done a fair point. It will depend, again, on the nature of the feast. Some cultures, it's going to be a lot easier to accommodate certain things, especially a lot of Middle Eastern recipes. You could have a whole feast and it could be completely vegetarian and you'd have no problem. So it is a hard to say where it is, but don't feel bad that you can't accommodate one person or even 10 people, depending on the size of what you're doing. It just might not be possible, and don't feel bad about it. Now, try not to be rude, obviously, and do try to be accommodating and approachable, so that way people know they can come to you to talk to you about their food issues to see if they can eat. But there's no way we can really accommodate everyone. And so if there are people you know have to be at the feast, obviously you want to try to accommodate them. One of the coronation feast that I cooked, the queen in question had a real problem personally with meat on the bone, which is an unusual issue, but it was her coronation feast. So of course I was going to, make sure that it was good for her. The accommodation I made there was, I was serving a whole chicken to all of the tables in the feast hall. Well, hers, I didn't cook the whole chicken. I cooked chicken breasts for the head table. And I had some big roasts that, yes, had some bones in them that I served to the rest of the hall. And I made sure that I had a boneless roast that I cooked for her. And that was an easy and simple accommodation to make. So it really depends on how hard it's going to be on you.
If I may interrupt, in Lockhawk, they are required to accommodate everybody.
Oh my goodness.
So I've posted a link to Master Drake Morgan's feast allergy management webpage. He's very fussy about that stuff. I cooked a feast in Lockhawk and I had to accommodate everybody, which was new to me. I always accommodate vegetarians. I usually draw the line at vegans. There was a vegan at the feast.
Oh my goodness.
And we managed to do it. And it was a Middle Eastern feast, which means it was incredibly meat heavy with almost no vegetarian dishes because they really don't eat vegetarian dishes much.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That is a new one. And oh my goodness, that is new to me. Thank you for sharing that.
So Agnes, there are a few comments in the chat. Would you like me to go through them?
Yes, please.
Okay, so let's see. Serena says that she has a separate food prep kit for gluten-free, and she has a separate colander, knives, measuring tool, sponge, pans. So she has a separate kit for her gluten-free. Malcorca, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. For us with a number of food issues in our big family, a comprehensive list of ingredients well before feast, like when the feast is published, is very important. And then
I would definitely agree with that. It's hard. It is something that I didn't used to be as good at, and I will totally admit that. And understand that remember when you are a person with food sensitivities, there's always a possibility that the cook may have to make day of changes. Things happen. So be aware of that. If you have a real issue with something with foods, make sure you talk to your feast steward ahead of time. So that way they know if they're having to make a substitute, they know to make sure that you know that there's an issue. So that's a good point.
When I do a feast, I have photocopied a list of every dish with every ingredient available for every diner. I live in a college town, so photocopying's cheap because I know many people have issues, and that way they can choose to avoid a dish that might be bad for them.
That's a good idea. That's definitely, and then you already have a menu, so you know what's in front of you. Especially, I will totally admit, I'm a picky eater. There's not a lot that I can't eat, but there are things that I don't like. And, if I have the menu and the list of ingredients in front of me, I don't accidentally eat something that I then want to spit out, which would be really rude.
So like Utratim said, she did post the link there. I clicked on it and it looks very, very valuable. I highly suggest each of you click on that and bookmark it. Then
I know I'm going to, because I'm sure it will come very handy as time goes on.
You have a very active chat. I don't know if you see it. So then Christine has said, is it considered rude to ask for a comprehensive list of ingredients for foods given at an event? She has several food sensitivities, but always feels like asking for a lengthy list would be super inconvenient for whoever is organizing things.
If you ask ahead of time, okay. I'm going to speak knowing the old me versus the new me. If you ask ahead of time, I probably would not have to your face rolled my eyes, but I might have. But I still would have provided it. And it wouldn't be a real inconvenience. Obviously, since my husband got diagnosed with celiac disease, I am so much more aware than I used to be. And that's part of why I wanted to give this class, and I want to help spread understanding of what it means for somebody like my husband to have to try to eat in different situations, and why so often, especially for him, like I said, because he's so sensitive, people will go, oh, we made something gluten-free so your husband can eat, and I have to go, oh, thank you for trying, but no, he's still not going to eat it, because as much as I like you, I can't trust that you didn't accidentally cross-contaminate that with some of the other glutinous stuff that's right next to it. So that's part of why I wanted to present this. So it's not rude. If somebody responds poorly to you, do try to understand that we're still trying to educate the rest of the SCA on modern eating. Just like there are so many other things that, we're trying to get society better. And this is one of those things, especially in the US at least. We aren't as good about being understanding of what it means that you can't eat X. And if you can't eat X and I don't prepare food that you can eat, that you don't get to participate in the social aspect of our lives that is feasting and eating and enjoying each other's company. So it shouldn't be considered rude. If you ask ahead of time, you should not be viewing it as being an inconvenience. There's chances are somebody else needs that information too. Maybe not, I may need to know about gluten, but somebody else may need to know about dairy or eggs or the vinegar. Like I said, vinegar is one of those ones that poor friend, she never plans on eating an SCA feast because there's usually vinegar somewhere along the line in most of our period cooking.
Almonds.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Almonds, especially. So it shouldn't be considered rude. If you ask ahead of time. Now, if you try to ask day of and they don't have something prepared, they're probably going to get a little frustrated. They should have thought of it beforehand. But so yes, just reach out. Try to make sure that you're reaching out at least 2 weeks ahead, if not longer, just because, once you hit that 2-week mark, they're probably doing a lot of pre-cooking. And so they are very busy. So don't worry about asking. They should be happy to give you the list of ingredients that they know. So there's that.
It's for health and safety. I don't see how anyone can complain when someone is looking out for their own health.
Well, I agree. I don't think anybody should complain. It's more of I try never to be rude, but I used to not be as understanding. And so that could have come across as me responding rudely. I will completely admit that. But especially once you get into that 2-week point, if they're spending a lot of time doing their pre-cook stuff, it may be a frustrating thing for them to try to make sure that they have a full list if they haven't already done it. Hopefully they already will have. Food allergies and food issues are becoming a much more well understood thing at this point in time. So I think it's less likely that you're going to run into somebody who doesn't at least have a basic list. They may not have the full ingredients in a sauce that they plan to use. If obviously this kind of goes back to modern cooking, but I may not know which barbecue sauce I'm going to use yet if I'm going to make barbecued pulled pork sandwiches. But I at least know I have barbecue sauce, and if you know that there's potential problem with barbecue sauce, then you kind of at least have an idea there. So.
Right. No, that's great. I think that a lot of people, especially now, are moving towards creating their entire ingredient list in the planning stage. So it helps if when you share your menu, you share your ingredient list as well. And if there are any changes to that as time goes on, they can just let people know that they've done that. But I think that's where the SCA is moving when it comes to feasts. But we have more stuff in the chat. Sorry, I had comments. Is it ever more appropriate to simply assign one member of your kitchen staff to preparing something for a specific person with accommodation needs versus altering the entire menu? And that's from Perez.
I think that some of that depends on what all, it depends on the extent of the accommodation you need to make. Usually I probably wouldn't alter a whole menu just for one specific person. Even when I was cooking for the feast for the queen, who didn't want to have the meat on the bone. I just made sure that we cooked the stuff for the head table separately from everything else that we cooked as far as meats went. So depending on the accommodation and how many people you're trying to accommodate. Now, if you know that you have a large number of people, like enough people for an entire table that need to eat dairy-free, and it's an actual allergy or something like that, yeah, you could potentially, have a person kind of be responsible for that. I don't think that you should worry too much about altering an entire menu unless you know you need to accommodate a larger number of people. If you are perhaps in an area where there are a lot of people who eat gluten-free, for a variety of reasons, then you might want to make sure that if you're making a pie, you actually go, and get a gluten-free pie crust, so that way those people can have that pie. And then, you just keep going with your other things. So I don't know that I would worry too much about altering an entire menu. Most of the time it's more about making smaller accommodations. So like I said, if you were talking about people who were gluten-free and you knew you had 8 or 10 of them that were going to come to the feast, well, then you can just make 1 or 2 pies that don't have gluten in them, and then they'll be accommodated. So
I posted something about a feast I cooked that involved the prince and princess of the Principality of the Mists. Each of them had totally different issues. There were attendees who were allergic to fish, and it was a Roman feast with fish sauce, and there were vegetarians. And so I mentioned a little bit about what we did to make sure that nobody went into anaphylactic shock. So that's posted in the chat. And I can put a link to the feast menu on my my website's gone, never mind. But you can ask me if you want to, and I can send you the information.
Yeah, it can be really interesting, when you have so many different people with different food issues and everything. And we're living in a world now where I don't think that the food issues have become more common. I think we're just more aware, and it's making us, eat healthier.
I mean, I can eat anything. I'm willing to eat anything. I have no problems. But I have been thinking about this since my second feast 21 years ago. So I've always been aware of accommodating people who have food problems. I don't know why everybody's just catching up now.
I think, especially here in the US, it's for so long, all of these, with the exception of people who actually go into anaphylactic shock, those were the only people we thought we had, that the cultural perception is that's all we had to worry about. And that's wrong. But it's a culture that's going to take time to change. And I'm really glad that we're at a point where we are, where it is much easier for people with, any food issue to be able to avoid what they need to avoid. So.
I think I'm fairly easy to do, actually with really large scale. For instance, I've made rice cooked in almond milk several times. And just have one crock pot or one thing that's a smaller amount, but you cook rice in not almond milk, and you just make sure they're really far away when you have those major allergens. If you have, something, that has dairy in it, say you're making a bunch of pies one time, and we made sure we had a gluten-free pie, we just cooked one without a crust. So, some of those are really easy to do.
Cooking without a crust is really easy. And actually one of my favorite things these days that I have been, that I discovered, I went into the grocery store one day and they had little cardboard tart pans. So they're disposable, they bake up in the oven. And so I can make little individual sized tarts, like I would make in one, my nice big tart pans that have, multiple, things in there. And I can go and I can make any of my tarts and I don't have to worry about the fact that it doesn't have a crust. So, you know, when I use my modern tart pans, when I had them, I don't have them anymore since I can't cook with gluten, but, you know, you had to have a crust in there to keep your, you know, egg mush from leaking out the bottom. Well, now I have these little, you know, tart pans, and they're not very expensive. It's like, you know, $3 or $4 for, you know, like 24. And so it makes it really easy for me to cook food that people can share. Or another thing I will do is muffin tins. Muffin tins are great for making, you know, little individual sized things for like a egg tart based type dish. And you don't need a crust. So you can easily leave the crust out. You don't even have to necessarily go and get a gluten-free crust. So that's a good option, you know, when you're talking for somebody who can't have gluten. I think one of the biggest things for people who are cooking and preparing, the big lesson I learned last year when I was doing the in for Known World Heralds and Scribes was how hard it was to keep people from cross-contaminating. And I think that's a really, that's a thing that there's still a huge learning curve on. It's so easy to do. So that's the one that even when you know better, sometimes you can still make a mistake. And so that's the one that we can all do our part to try to help educate people about not cross-contaminating foods, you know, when somebody has something that they need special, so that way they don't have an issue. We don't want people, you know, people who with mild issues who have to, you know, run to the bathroom, you know, and in a, you know, rushed fashion, or even people who could end up in the hospital, you know. So that's probably one of the biggest things everybody can do is help educate people about cross-contamination. So I'm glad we're living in a world where we can start talking about this more and understanding it more. And hopefully in a few more years, it'll be really easy to go, hey, I have somebody with this allergy. Can they eat? You know, can you accommodate them, or should they just skip feast?
Yeah, I had to keep an eagle eye on some of my cooks, because they would stir one pot with a spoon and then take the same spoon and start to put it in another pot.
Yes. Yeah, when I was having the thing that became the biggest problem was people, the two tables, I had them separated. I had one, you know, clearly, you know, I said, this is the gluten-free table. The tongs, every so often I would have to say, stop somebody from taking the tongs from one table to another table, just because there wasn't enough space in between the two, so it wasn't as clearly delineated and they didn't quite catch that they were moving to the other table. And that was one of our big ones is the utensils. People don't realize just one little, you know, just moving one utensil from one side to the other. Yeah, it's a hard one. That's a good one.
So we have a good question. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, as a suggestion on the utensil front, what I would recommend is consider maybe a color code of what utensil goes specifically to the gluten-free table or whatever the accommodation. So if you know that only the serving utensils that have a red ribbon on them on the end belong on that, that's a really easy visual for everyone to keep track of. You can notify your populace, your attendees that are coming in and watching that stuff, and then you as the person in charge, you very quickly can recognize something's off.
That is good. Thank you.
That's a good tip. Jackette asks, is there an awesome cleaning or sanitizing product that can be utilized for feasts and clean surfaces?
I don't think there is. The reality is that pretty much any of your sanitizing products are gonna, you know, most of your modern sanitizing products are gonna work as good as any other. Yeah, speaking again specifically from the gluten-free celiac perspective, it's one little crumb. You know, you know, we do take a risk in this household, because I will eat, my husband will occasionally go to the grocery store and he will bring me home a donut. If I don't wash my hands after I'm done and then I go upstairs to cook dinner for him, I could accidentally introduce a crumb of gluten into our food, even though there is no gluten in the kitchen. We explicitly have a rule that anything that has gluten stays out of the kitchen. I keep it in the basement, or there's a couple of other areas in the house that we allow the gluten, but the kitchen stays gluten-free. So that's kind of the problem, is it's not necessarily even the surfaces, but it is the surfaces as well, because especially when we come into these shared spaces, when we rent these facilities for the SCA and we're going to cook in them, it's really hard to be sure everything has been completely, you know, fully sanitized. All you'd have to do is miss one small spot, which, I mean, yes, we want to believe we will get everything, but let's admit we're human here. And as humans, things do get mixed. And, you know, we try to make every effort to do what we can, but so yeah, sadly, no, there's not some magic bullet, unfortunately.
So I have an anecdote that kind of goes with that. When I was first diagnosed celiac, it's been about 3 years now. The first Thanksgiving that we had, I cooked everything prior to. I made everything myself. And then after I was done cooking, my boyfriend wanted to make some butter horns. And his way of making butter horns is splashing flour all over the kitchen. Then I ended up very sick afterwards, even though I cooked everything separately and put it in a different location. And then he made the butter horns, because there was so much flour everywhere that it got into stuff. So what we've done since then is had the butter horns cooked in another location other than my kitchen, and then brought them to the dinner.
Yeah, when we're doing, you know, mundane holiday things with our families, I always bring a casserole of some kind for my husband to eat. You know, depending on what's served for dinner, he might eat the other things that people make, he might not. It kind of depends on how, you know, if we think somebody accidentally got flour all over the kitchen or not. But that's kind of how we have to do it. And we take the same approach with the SCA, which is why he never eats feast anymore. You know, a few quick things for those who are interested in, you know, the gluten-free cooking becomes a common one I see people asking questions about, at least here in the US. You know, most of your major supermarkets are going to actually have at least a minor gluten-free section. We live in a small, almost rural suburb of Des Moines, Iowa, you know, so small town, small city, you know, it's not a very big city to begin with, and we live in an almost rural suburb, and we have a very tiny Hy-Vee, for those who know that particular grocery chain, and we still have one freezer case that usually has gluten-free stuff in it, as well as the health food section usually has enough stuff for us to be able to, oh, we want spaghetti tonight. Okay, we can run to the grocery store and get noodles and we'll be okay. So that's the nice thing as far as those sorts of things go. Again, making crustless pies is a really easy thing to do modernly. Roasts, you know, roast meat of any kind without any additives is going to be a very easy thing. And then the other thing that we also often bring when we're going to events is meatballs, because most meatballs you don't have to add a filler, but even if you do, again, we can go buy gluten-free breadcrumbs at the grocery store without much of a problem. So, and then, you know, cheese and veggies, those are the other things that are just quick things, so that way you know. I wanted to make sure I added that since we're getting close to the end of the class, in case there was anybody that wanted to know those sorts of things too. Are there any other questions or anything anybody else would like to add?
I'd like to say, Malcorca said earlier that he's very happy that we're having these discussions, at least, and I also am happy that we're having this discussion. During our last reign, I am celiac, and I had to make sure that I had at least something to eat, because when you're clean, you have to sit and eat and hopefully not get sick afterwards. And everyone did a wonderful job of accommodating that the issue of no gluten. Not once did I get sick after a feast. And I think that it's very doable. We have a baroness who's also a vegan, a baroness in Callantyre who's a vegan, and they accommodate her as well quite often. So it's a matter of looking at ingredients, educating yourself. Usually the person who calls and says, hey, I have this food allergy, or I have this eating that I choose to do, you can ask them, okay, what can you eat? And they'll give you a list of those things. A lot of times it's also good to give, like if you know you're going to an event and you'd like to sit feast, contact the feast steward as soon as you know you're going, so they have time to plan. And it helps in my shire, if we're gonna have a feast, I tell my feast steward, put out the call as soon as you know, like immediately saying, hey, I'm gonna be your feast steward. If you would like to sit my feast and have a food allergy or some kind of accommodation that I can make, please let me know as soon as possible so that I can make those arrangements for you. That's what I had to add.
And I will say this, if you're in Callantyre and you are somebody you know needs to eat gluten-free and you are suddenly starving and you don't know what you can eat, come look for me. There's a really good chance that we have plenty of food because we almost always pack more than my husband needs.
I was going to ask this kind of out there, because there are more and more modern things with ingredients in them. Like I didn't know maltodextrin could have gluten in it. Are there resources to like double check that? Because I have a friend who is gluten-free, and I tried to cook for her and it almost ended in tears because I was reading through ingredients lists and I had to Google everything and like, does this have wheat in it? Does that have wheat in it? Is that the best way, or is there kind of like a list that says just skip
in the US, I don't know that there is a list. There may be now. I kind of have it in my head, the things we watch for. And a lot of times I sit there and I just go, I don't know what it is. Okay, so forget it, you know? And the really scary thing is, I will mention this too, is that in the US, there are things that say that they're gluten-free that there's no rules like there are in Europe that it has to be okay. You know, a big example of something that should be gluten-free, but you have to worry about is oats and oatmeal, because they harvest it with the same equipment that they harvest their wheat. Unless it's explicitly treated as gluten-free and they do the specific stuff, you never know. And it's really sad that I see the comment here about the websites with the gluten-free and ingredients and stuff. Oh yes, the celiac.org is a very good one. Yeah, there are some great places, but there's a lot of stuff that just keeps getting in. As far as a modern thing that like I didn't even think about until you know, like a year or so after my husband was diagnosed with celiac, is I have to make sure I have gluten-free lipstick, because I don't worry about the rest of my makeup, because you know he's not going to go licking my face regularly, but the lipstick is the one thing I do have to worry about getting into his mouth. And it wasn't even something I thought about. And that's even worse at trying to identify wheat ingredients, because they really like to use the scientific names, unlike with food where usually they at least say, you know, wheat.
Gluten is in other things besides wheat. Wheat is not the only grain that has gluten.
Oh yes, that's just the easy one. So yes, I would highly recommend. I've actually gotten, unfortunately in the US it's a little bit troublesome because it doesn't all, we don't have the same of everything, but a lot of good stuff I have found has actually been out of Europe because they take it a lot more seriously. So sometimes I specifically go to European websites to get a better understanding of certain items. But even now, I'm still regularly having to go and go, wait, is that gluten-free? I need to go look it up. It's a sad truth.
If anyone wants to contact me, I put my Facebook name in the chat. I'm going to go to another class now. Thank you very, very much for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for attending. Yeah, we ran right into the hour mark. I wasn't sure we were going to do that, so.
I noted this on the chat. I'm from the Bright Hills Cooks Guild list, and we have a lot of people, not just myself. I think I'm the one with the most allergies in the guild, but we do have a lot of people who have dietary restrictions. So we've been doing this for quite a while, and we try to make sure that we have a vegetarian and a dairy-free substitution available in case, or a wheat-free substitution. And we're very aware of things like gluten-free. They're even aware of my wonderful allergy of corn. Corn is in everything.
Oh, yes.
My daughter and my son and I are allergic to corn.
Oh, I had like a father of a family friend who I was aware of that, I don't know that it was an allergy, but I know they said that basically he wasn't allowed to eat corn and all of the things they had to go through. And that was, 20 years ago. So it was harder even than it is now. I will say I am so glad that my husband was diagnosed with celiac disease in a day and age when it is so much easier to eat gluten-free than it used to be. But yeah, corn is one, especially here in the US, that people do not realize how bad it is.
Thank you very much for the class.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Just real quick before we go, I was just wondering if anybody happened to know. So there have been a few mentions of particular periods and nationalities of cuisine that were particularly difficult for a particular kind of restriction. I'm wondering if anybody has started to undertake as a project kind of noting what particular cuisines lend them, so to say that, like, as if you are a feastocrat sitting down to plan a menu to begin with, these categories of things tend to be easier to accommodate vegetarians, easier to accommodate gluten-free.
Not that I know of, but that is, now you've got my brain intrigued. I will say, I actually am in the middle of a project for, I'm eventually going to enter into a Kingdom A&S championship of a plausibly period gluten-free feast, well, not feast, but dinner. And of course I'm specifically setting this one very late in the 16th century when the scientific method became a thing. So that way we can go, okay, through scientific method, they figured out that this person can't eat wheat and went from there. Plausibly period, probably not, but I can make it happen. And certainly the gluten-free one is actually, in many ways, easier to accommodate than a lot of other ones.
Right.
It's pretty, so yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much for this. This was great.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for coming.
Take care.
Oh, well, I think we are done, so we can call it a day.
All right. Yep, it's back to just the two of us. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'm going to stop recording.